All right, everyone. Good afternoon. We're going to give it another minute or two just to let the rest of the folks sign in, but we'll get started in just a second. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the DRPT MPO webinar. My name is Grant Sparks. I'm the Manager of Transit Planning and Corridor Development for DRPT. And today we're going to walk you through a few important items that we just wanted to share with everyone. And our hope is that we're going to be doing these on a more regular basis, probably at least once a year, just to check in with everyone and to answer any questions that you have. So we have a pretty jam-packed agenda this morning. I'm just going to start with welcome and introductions, introduce our team. I'm going to walk through the 5303 program. This will be more of just a refresher for most of you. Walk through some grant administration procedures, so touch on the reimbursement request and our travel policy. Then I'm going to turn it over to Wood Hudson, who's going to talk about transit asset management plans and public transportation agency safety plans, or Ptask. Dan Sonnenklar will lead a discussion on transit strategic plans and transit development plans. He will also talk about a recent transit capital needs assessment that we prepared over the last few months. And Marie Berry is going to join us from our finance department to talk about the new State Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP development. And our hope is to leave a few minutes at the end to answer any questions that you have. If you do have a question, please type the question in the chat box on the right side of your screen, and we will read them in order at the end of the webinar. I also would like to mention that this webinar is being recorded, and we will be posting it on our website shortly after the conclusion of the webinar. So just to get us started, introductions to our team. I mentioned that I'm Grant Sparks, Manager of Transit Planning and Corridor Development. We also have Ciara Williams, who is our Northern Virginia Transit Planning Manager. Tiffany Dubinsky, who many of you might know, she is the statewide transit planner. Dan Sonnenklar is also a statewide transit planner, as is Wood Hudson. And Taylor Jenkins, our transit planning intern for now, and starting on January 10th, she will be a statewide transit planner as well. So this is our team, and we've been waiting to get fully staffed for a while, and starting on January 10th, we will be. In terms of the assignments for our staff, here's a quick look at the distribution of DRPT staff MPO assignments across the state. These responsibilities have shifted a bit as we've had staffing changes at DRPT over the last couple of years, and we really do appreciate all MPOs being flexible with us as we fill those vacancies. In that vein, we will likely be shifting responsibilities again in early 2020 as we round out our team and shift things around just a little bit. And when we do that, we will be sending formal MPO appointment letters to each of you to know who your DRPT representative is. But just to quickly go through them, as I mentioned earlier, Ciara Williams takes care of the Northern Virginia MPOs, that being the TPB, Winchester, and Fredericksburg. Tiffany Dubinsky handles Richmond, the Tri-Cities area, and Hampton Roads. Wood Hudson in Harrisonburg, Rockingham, Stanton, Augusta, Waynesboro, and New River Valley. And Dan Sonnenklar in Charlottesville, Albemarle, Central Virginia, and Roanoke Valley. Mike Mucha and Emily Del Ross are actually in our transit program management department, and they handle Bristol and Danville for now. We might be making some changes, though, in early January, and of course, we will let you know about those. So we'll dive right into FTA 5303 funding. This is the first topic, and again, we'll just give you a quick overview. I'm going to describe the program goals, eligible projects, match requirements, unified planning work program development, and the process for MPOs to apply for these funds. Much of the content described in this section and the following sections are reviewed in greater detail within DRPT's FY21 program application guidance. This program application guidance is posted on the DRPT website and in the online grant administration website, or OLGA. If you need help finding this document or need a copy of it, please contact your statewide transit planner assigned to your MPO. Yes, and we already have a question, and we'll just answer this one from Ron in Tri-Cities. We will be sending out a copy of the PowerPoint slides at the end of this, since I have everyone's email address. So thank you for that question. All right. So again, just a quick overview of the 5303 program. It provides funding and associated requirements for multimodal transportation planning in metropolitan areas. One of these requirements is that the planning process needs to utilize a 3C approach, which all of you should be familiar with. That's a cooperative, continuous, and comprehensive approach, resulting in long-range plans and short-range programs reflecting transportation investment priorities. In Virginia, we, DRPT, serves as the state DOT for the purposes of apportioning FTA 5303 funds, and funding is allocated to the MPOs from DRPT based on a formula that is approved by FTA and FHWA. So just, I'm not going to read these, but these are the program goals for the 5303 program. One thing that I did want to point out at the bottom is that for those of you who are unaware, in 2018, the Virginia General Assembly passed some legislation requiring our 16 largest transit agencies to complete a transit strategic plan. We're gonna discuss the mandated components of TSPs later on in this webinar, but this is something that should be on your radar as you communicate transit planning needs in your urban areas. MPOs should coordinate with their transit agencies that must meet this requirement, and DRPT does strongly encourage MPOs to program some 5303 funding towards the development of these plans. So if you're unaware of these requirements, again, please get with your statewide transit planner, and we can talk to you about how you should be coordinating with your various transit agencies in your area. Eligible projects for 5303. Again, I'm not going to read through these, but these should be standard, and you all should have a good idea of what projects are eligible for 5303 funding. Obviously, supporting projects that support the economic vitality of the metro area, increase the safety and security of the transportation system, and that's for motorized and non-motorized users. Increase accessibility and mobility, that's for people and for freight, and so on. So all the projects that you apply for in your 5303 application should satisfy one of these eligible project criteria. In terms of match requirements, you all probably know this as well, but the federal share is not to exceed 80% of the eligible expenses. DRPT does provide a state funding match of 10%, which leaves the remaining 10% as the local match from local funding sources. Other state or federal funds cannot be used as a local match, so the 10% needs to come from the locals. In terms of the application process, 5303 applications are due to us in May and are submitted through the OLGA website. If you do not have access to OLGA, if you are new to this process, please let us know, and we can walk you through the process for getting an account set up. Once you submit your application in OLGA, you will be asked to review and sign your FTA certs and assurances. This is something that all grantees of FTA funding need to do. When you're submitting, you also will be asked to upload a copy of your draft UPWP. So based on the timing of the submissions, you might not have an adopted UPWP. And we're okay accepting a draft UPWP so long as once your MPO board does adopt the UPWP, you send us a copy of that because we need to have a copy on file. As we are reviewing your 5303 applications, we are looking for them to, the expense items to match those that are listed in the UPWP. So those two figures need to align. So we will review and approve the 5303 applications. Once they are approved, the 5303 funding is programmed in the Virginia SIP. And then shortly after that, DRPT works to develop 5303 contracts with each of your organizations in the summer and the fall. I'm not going to go over the requirements of the UPWP, but I did want to mention that as a partner agency to our MPOs, we do like to review the draft UPWPs before adoption. This is just to make sure that our estimated 5303 funding for your MPO ties back to what you have in your UPWP. In February, that's typically when we provide MPOs with your estimated 5303 funding amount. This is if actual funding is provided by FTA, we will give you that figure, or we will give an estimate if FTA does not provide that to us at that point. And one thing that I did want to point out here, we've had this issue in the past, that any carryover funding included in UPWPs must be clearly documented as a separate expenditure. So if you're carrying over any previous 5303 funding, we want that broken out into a different line so that we can tie your new funding to what we have allocated to you. So next I'll quickly walk through a few grant administration policies and procedures. We do prepare a grant administration procedures handbook and post it in OLGA. That was recently posted about a month or two ago, and it is available right now if you're interested in taking a look at it. There is a lot of information in there, but specifically we're going to highlight section 6.0, which is the grant reimbursement process. So I'm going to go over the reimbursement requests process, our travel policy, and then I'm also going to quickly note our use of bench contractors that might be of interest to you. So, as I mentioned earlier, all reimbursement requests are submitted through the online grant administration system, or OLGA. The frequency of reimbursements does vary. We do not want more than one reimbursement per month, but typically for 5303 funding, we ask for reimbursements every quarter. Expenses incurred must be for authorized activities, which are listed as tasks in your UPWP during the executed agreement time, and amounts that are submitted must have appropriate supporting documentation. And I'll go over that in just a little bit. So in terms of the reimbursement process, the key steps involved with that, the grantee submits the reimbursement request in OLGA, as I mentioned earlier. DRPT staff, so your statewide transit planner, will review your reimbursement request. And we might ask you to upload additional documentation if there's a deficiency, or if we have some questions and need some additional supporting documentation. We'll certainly get back to you and ask you to upload those documents. Then DRPT staff will either approve, suspend, or reject your reimbursement request in our system. And if it is rejected, we will likely tell you why and ask you to resubmit so long as you meet the criteria that we lay out. And then you can, I guess, for final reimbursement, typically I believe our 5303 contracts run 18 months. So they will start on July 1st. And they will go through December 31st of the next year. And so the 90 days for final reimbursement, that's after December 31st. So you have, I guess, until March 31st to submit your final reimbursement request for that particular funding year. Or for that particular 5303 funding, but the work being done that you're asking for reimbursement on must still be completed during that contract period. So it cannot be a reimbursement request for any work done during that 90-day period. It must be prior to that. And then also at the very bottom, just wanted to point out that extensions. So if you do not think you'll be able to spend your 5303 funding in the contract period, you must submit a grant extension at least 30 days prior to contract end date. So this is usually done before December for 5303 funding, that you would put in a grant extension request in OLGA, and we would review that. And we typically do not allow more than one extension per contract. So do be aware of those requirements. So a little bit more detail on the reimbursement requests. We have had some issues in the past with receiving supporting documentation that does not include a summary sheet that kind of describes what is attached. We do ask MPOs to include a summary sheet moving forward for all expenses included in the reimbursement request. At a minimum, the summary sheet should include the date of the invoice number, the reimbursement period for that invoice, the total amount and amount charged to the reimbursement request, breaking down the federal, state, and local match for 5303 funding, identify the actual UPWP task that you're asking for reimbursement for, the point of contact, the name of the vendor. If any work was done by a vendor, we certainly want to know who that was done by. Description of the expense, and then the total amount on the summary sheet must equal the total amount in the reimbursement request. In terms of the legible attachments and supporting documents, we've also had issues in the past of just not being able to read some of the receipts that have been scanned over to us. So please just be aware of that and make sure that what you're sending us, we can actually open and read and understand. These attachments should include an expense summary of the staff time and any benefits. If you did use a contractor and are asking for reimbursement for contractor charges, we want to see details of the work that's being performed, noting, printing and materials, travel documents, and then any actual receipts that you have, please scan those in. One thing that we developed on our end to hopefully simplify the process a little bit for everyone is that we've created a reimbursement sheet template, which is available to any and all of you upon request. And it's actually on this slide right here. This is to hopefully just simplify the process a little bit. Again, we're happy to share this with any of you. Some MPOs do a very, very good job of kind of organizing their reimbursements and their summary sheets. But if this makes things easier for you, please just let us know and we'd be happy to share a copy. And then real quick, just touching on our travel policy, we do reimburse for personnel travel on official business or training that's directly related to a UPWP task or MPO related work. It must be reasonable and necessary expense. And I did want to point out that you must use GSA rates for lodging and meals. We have a link here for the GSA website, which gives per diem rates. And I also wanted to point out that this is not just for MPO staff, but also for any consultants that you are using. They must follow the GSA rates posted on that website, and that we will not reimburse for any travel that's above and beyond those published rates. So please do be aware of that. In terms of meal reimbursements, those are only valid for approved overnight travel. So if you are going somewhere and you are not spending the night, we will not reimburse for meals. And in terms of approved overnight travel, if you do have any questions as to whether or not your travel plans qualify as an eligible expense, please reach out to your statewide transit planner to ask about that, and we can get back to you before you make your plans. Lodging reimbursements for individuals traveling overnight on official business. It must be outside of your region or project area. So if you are in Richmond and you're asking for a hotel reimbursement in Richmond, that would be a red flag on our end, and we would not reimburse for that. So just be aware. So in terms of the documentation that we're looking for travel reimbursements, again, a summary sheet listing each travel expense, including the date of the travel, the lodging, the flight, the detailed purpose of the travel, the destination, and the amount of the expense being charged. We also ask for receipts for parking and tolls and any ground transportation and other transportation fees. The actual hotel stay receipt that shows the room rate, taxes, and fees, we ask for a copy of that. Any registration fees for if it's a conference or a training, we want to see documentation of that as well. It would be great to get a copy of the agenda or any other documentation showing, what the purpose of the meeting or conference was. And then also documentation for mileage. So, a printout of Google Maps showing the actual route that you took and the estimated mileage there and back would be good as well. So if you are not going overnight, but you do have a meeting that does require travel, we do reimburse, and that's mostly for just, if you're incurring expenses for parking or tolls, and then for the miles traveled as well. These different items need to be addressed in an expense summary sheet, just showing, in addition, just the date of the travel, your destination, the purpose of the meeting, again, parking, tolls, and other expenses, and the miles traveled. For these types of reimbursements, we also ask for the agendas for the meetings, and like the overnight travel, any travel maps showing the route that you took and the estimated mileage, and the actual supporting documentation for parking and toll receipts. So last but not least, just wanted to point this out. I'm not sure if you all are aware of this, but DRPT does have a general transit planning bench contract with the following groups. This is KFH Group, Kimley Horn and Associates, AECOM, and Michael Baker. So if any of you have transit planning needs and need some consulting help, and you'd like to use one of these contractors, please let us know, and we can work with you to so that you can take advantage of the rates that we have. There is more information on these contracts found on our website, and we have a screenshot here on this slide showing where you can find that. But if you'd like I said, if you'd like any more information, please reach out to us, and we'd be happy to work with you on that. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Wood Hudson, who's going to walk through the transit asset management plans and public transportation agency safety plans.
Thank you, Grant. Yes, I'm going to run through quickly TAM and Ptask. Most of this will be the same as the presentation I gave on the quarterly coordination webinar last week. So I'm going to go through it rather quickly today. Essentially for TAM, next slide, please. This is a requirement that affects all of our public transportation agencies that provide public transportation using Chapter 53 funds, and applies specifically to their capital assets. This includes buses and buildings and structures that they own. It assesses the current condition, determines what condition and performance the asset should be, identifies unacceptable risks, including safety risks, and continuing to use the asset if it's not in a state of good repair. It's basically just a process to help balance limited resources to make sure we can prioritize funding for correct assets. Next slide, please. Generally, agencies fall into two categories under the TAM regulations. Tier 1 agencies, which is like our WMATAs of the world, are really big transit agencies, or those that operate fixed guideway transit facilities, and then Tier 2 agencies. And the reason we bring up this kind of tiering is that DRPT is sponsoring a statewide TAM plan for the Tier 2 agencies, and the vast majority of our Tier 2 agencies are participating in this plan, and therefore are covered by the TAM performance measures that we'll get to a little later in this presentation. We are rolling out our second set of TAM targets. If you all will remember, about a year and a half ago, we were coming to you with the initial 2018 TAM targets, and having those discussions about getting those into the long-range transportation plans and the TIPs. We are now rolling out our FY19 target. Just to note that this will actually, FY20 targets, this will actually be the same as our FY19 targets, so there's no change in the targets at this time. However, we expect when we do review this again next year that we will be adjusting these targets, and that's just a heads up for things to come. Next slide, please. So here are the targets, and we will be providing these to the MPOs along with some sample language for inclusion in the TIP. I know that most of the MPOs previously included just reference language that referred to the TAM plan. Moving forward with the new TIPs, we would like each of the MPOs to include the TAM targets in the appropriate locations in their TIPs. This is very similar to all the other highway-based targets. And we will provide some template letters and a copy of this slide, so you don't need to photograph it or madly copy it. We'll be getting this out to you. Next slide, please. On or before January 31st, which is our deadline for reporting our TAM targets to the Federal Transit Administration. That January 31st deadline for us then starts the 180-day clock for the MPOs to make their adjustments to your TIPs and long-range transportation plans, which results in a deadline of July 29th, 2020. And again, if you are an MPO that has a Tier 1 transit agency, please be reaching out to your Tier 1 agency directly, as they might have a different timeline and different targets than what are in the statewide Tier 2 TAM plan. Next slide, please. Going to switch gears here and run through Ptask. A lot of this will just be kind of an update. Ptask is the last of the MAP 21 performance measures, and it's very much an ongoing process. We are working with our Tier 2 agencies, which is largely the same group of agencies that were the Tier 2 agencies under the TAM plan. We have a consultant that's been going out and meeting with each of the agencies, reviewing their safety plans, reviewing all of the components of this safety management system, and developing individualized Ptask targets. Next slide, please. Next slide. This is just covering the agency split down. Okay, so here are the safety performance measures related to Ptask. It covers fatalities, injuries, safety events, and system reliability. And there's some target examples in there, and that's kind of what the numbers are going to look like. We're still waiting to receive the information from the consultant that's working with all the individual agencies. This is an ongoing process, and as it gets closer to wrapping up, we will be providing TAM target tables for each of the MPOs for the appropriate transit agencies that are within your MPO areas, if they are a Tier 2 agency. Next slide, please. Just some general language. Please make sure that if you have a Tier 1 agency, you're reaching out to them, because again, their timeline is probably very different from this one of the Tier 2 agencies. If you have multiple transit agencies, you should coordinate with the agencies, and you may want to consider adopting MPO-specific targets that cover both of the agencies or multiple agencies versus going with the targets that we'll provide. And we're happy to answer any specific questions when it comes to unique circumstances like that. You can reach out to your program manager or contact me directly, and I'd be happy to go over individual cases with you. Next slide. Here's the timeline for Ptask compliance. We will be reporting our Tier 2 statewide plan to FTA on July 20th, 2020. MPOs will then have 180 days to incorporate the targets into their into their LRTPs and TIPs. There's a lot of acronyms with this. I apologize. And that will be January 20th, 2021 will be the compliance date on Ptask for the MPO. And
great. My name is Dan Sonnenklaar, and I'm going to be picking up for the next few slides, talking about transit strategic plans and transit development plans. So as Grant mentioned earlier, new legislative initiative as of 2018 has required that large agencies throughout the state complete a transit strategic plan. The goal of that is to create a strategic blueprint outlining desired changes that will improve the provision of transit service in each agency's service area within existing funding structures. That point about existing funding structures is key, is that we want people to look at improving their services while trying to stay as close to revenue neutral as possible. The TSP process includes the following four categories of items that need to be developed. First, the agency completing the plan will need to develop a strategic vision. If that agency has recently completed a visioning process kind of outside of the TSP process, they will not need to complete it again, but they can incorporate that as the overall strategic vision for the planning process that we're mandating. The second item is the completion of a system performance and operational analysis, which identifies areas where the agency can improve to achieve that strategic vision. That would be followed by the identification of desired service improvements and modifications over the life of the plan, and then finally the development of an implementation plan and a financial plan outlining when those changes will be made and how they will be funded. Now, specifically with the MPOs, I'm sorry, you can go back. For the MPOs, there's been a lot of confusion about the nature of these new planning requirements. We wanted to just state here that these are not necessarily meant to be strategic system redesign projects, but can serve to set the strategic vision before completing such a redesign process. If a redesign has been recently implemented, this document should reflect those changes and the decisions that went into that redesign process. And as far as funding goes, though the completion of the TSP is ultimately the responsibility of the transit agencies throughout the state, we expect MPOs to participate in the development of the plans and provide some funding support, whether that's through 5303 or through other local funds to implement these. So as far as the timeline for TSP development, we currently have two pilot projects underway. One is being completed by HRT, which is on target to be completed in April or May of 2020. And GLTC is also completing their update, which should be finished by the end of this calendar year. In addition to those two pilot projects, we have a phased approach to having our other agencies implement their TSPs. So in FY21, PRTC, Blacksburg Transit, CAT, Fredericksburg Regional Transit, GRTC in Richmond, PAT in Petersburg, Radford, and Valley Metro in Roanoke are all slated to begin their TSP process, followed by Phase 3 in FY22, where DASH, ART, Fairfax, Connector, Loudoun, Harrisonburg Transit, and WADA would be expected to complete theirs, or at least start theirs. And yeah. So in addition to the transit strategic plan, we also have requirements of the agencies that were not listed on the slide before to complete transit development plans, or TDPs. This is for smaller agencies that do not satisfy the TSP size requirements. They will need to still complete their transit development plans. And it says here every 5 years, but we are currently working on new guidelines that may impact the parameters for timing and for the updates for that plan. So please stay tuned for that. The TDP update process will include the following four items. That's the identification of goals, objectives, and service standards, the completion of a system performance analysis, which is kind of a scaled back version of the TSP requirements, followed by the identification of desired service improvements and modifications, and then the development of an implementation plan and a financial plan that shows when those changes will be made and, again, how they will be funded. So I know that was brief on the strategic plans and the trend of development plans, and we're happy to take any questions about them that you all might have. But for right now, I'm going to go over a recent analysis that we completed here at DRPT, looking at capital needs over the next 5 fiscal years. This information was presented last week to TSDAC, one of our statewide planning committees, and it outlines a process that we went through this past fall to update the 5-year capital budgets that each of our agencies are required to give us. Usually those are included in the 6-year improvement program, or the SIP, and it includes projects that will need capital funds from federal, state, and local sources. In the 2019 update, in order to improve the accuracy of those budgets, we engaged all of the agencies throughout the state to identify the projects that are realistically, or that are slated to be realistically implemented over the next 5 years, with a little bit of more scrutiny and accuracy than we have had in the past. And in that process, we tried to ensure that the budgets were not a wish list, but rather a list of capital projects that agencies need and intend to implement. And the major takeaway from that process is that we found that between FY21 and FY25, agencies throughout the state are planning to implement $932 million in capital projects. As mentioned a moment ago, these projects will be funded through a combination of federal, state, and local dollars. And according to this analysis, you'll all notice that there's a bit of a spike in FY21, and that's just because FY22, there was a number of larger projects slated for that fiscal year that caused that bump. Otherwise, it's a relatively even growth over the 5-year period. When taking into account projected capital funding over this period of time, we've determined that there will be a $208 million shortfall in state-controlled capital funds. State-controlled capital funds are made up by 2 large pools of funding. That's the state capital funds that we get from the Mass Transit Trust Fund, and also state-controlled federal funds, which come from various different sources from the federal government. And so the big takeaways from this analysis were that we have $932 million worth of needs, and taking into account those projected funding streams, we're going to have a $208 million shortfall. And to make up for that shortfall, we are planning on going to the legislature this coming year to propose that an additional $42 million in capital funding each fiscal year for the next 5 years. And I believe that's all we have on this. So I can turn it over to Marie, who will walk you through the new State Transportation Improvement Program. Yeah, okay.
So this is Marie Berry from the Programming Department. So this is a new STIP year, so all the MPOs should be developing new 4-year TIPs for their areas. Just so you know, this is a portion of the calendar that's up on your screen that VDOT developed for the whole process, because VDOT's portion of the STIP is probably the majority of your TIP. Just so you know, the DRPT portion of the STIP is made up of all the TIPs in the area, transit portions. And the reason why our process is slightly different is because we have grantees that are spending your human service and transit money, and not DRPT. Whereas on the VDOT side, VDOT's the one spending the money. So that's why we encourage you to go out and have a relationship and conversations with your human service agencies and transit agencies to find out what they plan on spending the money on in the next 4 years. That conversation should already be happening. As of December, you should be working with those agencies to develop your 4-year tips. In January, you should be working on those tips. And then by February, you're going to have to put that out for public participation. We would appreciate it if you would send your draft tip that you put out for public involvement to me if you can, so we can start developing the 4-year STIP based on those. And then in April, after you have a final approved tip, you can just forward me what those approved tips are, let me know what the changes might have been due to the public participation, and then we will submit that for final submission to the FTA in July. If you all have any questions or have any concerns about your portion of the tip, you can contact me, and we will help you as best as we can. Some of the MPOs have already reached out to me asking me for some more information, and I'm glad to provide it. So any way we can help, please reach out to us, because we don't want to be waiting at the nth hour and trying to throw together something when it should have been in process all along. And that's it.
All right. And that concludes our presentation. So I will now take a look at the questions that we got through the chat box. When will estimates of FY21 funding be available and sent to MPOs? So I believe that's regarding 5303 funding.
Generally what we ask, for the fiscal year 21 SIP, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay. We usually come up with an estimate around February, I believe, and we will send those out for development of your UPWPs. I assume that's why you're asking.
Yes.
Generally what happens is that the FTA does not issue a Federal Register in a timely manner for us to be able to let you know a better number. So we usually use the prior year's number and then any carryover we might have available for distribution. So we will send out an estimate around February for that. If we get a Federal Register with good numbers, we can certainly give you a better number. But generally, we're not getting, the Federal Register's been coming out later and later every year, so we're not really relying on that.
All right. Next question, will DRPT still be sending draft tip tables for each transit agency to the MPOs?
We are trying to get away from that because we are envisioning that you should be developing a draft tip on your own with your conversations with your human service and transit providers. If you need a shell of one, we can certainly provide that, but we are asking the MPOs to be developing their own tips and, you know, working with their transit agencies to figure out what they need in the next 4 years.
Yeah, and I'll just add that it's the transit agency that has a better idea of their program of projects than DRPT does. We hope that they share that information with us, and we do request that level of detail each year, but at the end of the day, the projects are developed by the transit agency. So they are the best source of information as you are developing your tips. So just to kind of piggyback off what Maurice said, we really do encourage all MPOs to develop relationships with the transit agencies in your area, because we'll be looking for you all to be working with them on tip changes and tip development moving forward.
The other thing is that you can always use your current tip as a starting point. You work from there, and majority of the transit agencies have the same projects from year to year, so you can start with your current tip and then just move forward 4 years.
All right, next question. Can 5303 funds be used towards OIPI on-call consultant? We might need a little bit more information on that. And Brian, please reach out to us so we can address your question. I'm not totally sure what you're asking.
Is it part of the UPWP?
Yeah, I guess that would be our question
Yeah.
to you. Would be if it's a task that's included in your UPWP, then yeah, you can definitely use our bench contract to satisfy any of those tasks in your UPWP.
Sure.
All right, next question. Why did DRPT change its policy regarding meal reimbursement for business day trips out of region? I don't think, and Brian, we can follow up with you again on this one, but it's my understanding that our policy has not changed. I don't know. We can follow up with you on that just to make sure that we're clear with what we presented to you and make sure that we didn't confuse you or anything. But I don't believe we've changed our travel policy in a while, so it should remain consistent.
And please, the best source for information is looking at that grant procedures manual available in Olga.
Yeah, the grant administration procedures, it's like a handbook, basically.
Mm-hmm.
It's posted in Olga. So that provides more detail on our travel policy. And again, I don't believe that section has changed in a while. Next question. Please provide the tip table template. That was again from Brian. And we can again talk to you about that, but those are all of our questions.
The question, I want to follow up on the tip question. I'm wondering if the tip templates that we have sent in prior years were to help MPOs on a year-to-year basis when we issue a draft SIP. So sometimes we will send information on what's in the approved SIP and how it affects your tips. So perhaps, and that we will continue to do, we will provide information on what's included in the draft 6-year improvement program to help you update your tips. But this, the development of a new tip is completely on you. So perhaps there's some confusion in what we send for that versus what we're sending for the new tip.
Okay. If any of you have follow-up questions, you can reach out to me. My email address is on the screen, or do reach out to your statewide transit planner, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And with that, I don't believe we have any other questions in the queue. So just wanted to thank all of you for your time. Happy holidays, and we will be in touch at the beginning of the year. Thank you.